So I apologize here at the beginning this morning for my voice and any sniffling and sneezing that might take place here, but that's why we're doing this online today rather than in person. Genesis 1:26 says this, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Most of you know that one of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life. I'm aware there are some who don't care much for it because they consider it to be rather sappy or overly sentimental, but it has some good values in it that I believe are worth noting, especially in our day when such moral principles are severely lacking. So I've borrowed the title from that film and given it to a series of messages that I hope to share between now and Christmas. Now, these aren't all typical Christmas season messages, but they all relate in some way to the idea that it's a wonderful life. And I guess that especially holds true of today's message, because I believe the Lord wants us to focus on how wonderful life itself is. How valuable is the life, the breath, the opportunity to live that God has given us. So in that sense, it truly is a wonderful life. For some people, especially kids, they think that there's no more wonderful time of the year to be alive than around Christmas. There's all the excitement of putting up the Christmas tree and enjoying the other decorations. There are all kinds of special activities and festivities going on. And of course, there's the anticipation of receiving gifts. But one of the downsides of the holiday season is that for some people, it's a time of depression. Statistics have shown that suicide rates tend to drastically rise during this time of the year. More people intentionally take their lives during the holiday season than any other time of the year. They destroy or throw away this wonderful gift of life that God has given to them. Now, if you're familiar with the movie, and I hope that you are, if not, I encourage you to watch it sometime between now and Christmas. But this is part of what that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, is about. It opened on Christmas Eve with people praying for a man named George Bailey. We find out over the course of time that this man had become depressed over not ever really getting to do what he wanted to do in life. He hadn't been able to leave his small town of Bedford Falls in which he had grown up. He hadn't been able to travel and to see the world like he had hoped to do and to make a lot of money in the process. So he was depressed. And on this particular day, he was desperate because of financial error made by his business associate, his uncle. Because of that, he was facing the possibility of bankruptcy and scandal and imprisonment. Kind of like some others who have been in the news just over the last week or so. So because of all that, he was on the verge of trying to take his own life, about ready to jump off of a bridge into an icy cold river. But in answer to all those prayers that were going up for George, an angel, or of sorts, a second-class angel, was sent. And he ended up showing George how wonderful his life really was, and what a huge mistake it would be to throw it away. And I believe that's what the Lord wants us to remember today and throughout the holidays. To remember how wonderful, precious, and valuable life is. Life and the opportunity to live is a great gift from God for which we should be thankful. And we should make the most of it and not waste it and certainly not throw it away. But unfortunately, it seems like human life is valued less and less by more and more people these days. We know how the value of certain things can fluctuate. The value of gold and stocks and I guess these cryptocurrencies that I don't fully understand. and other finance-related things. They can rise and fall over a period of time, or sometimes very quickly, depending on economic factors and economic news, or some statement made by the Federal Reserve Chairman, or some comment made by the President, or just by other circumstances. Their value can rise or plunge, often on people's perception of what might happen moving forward. And things that are considered what we call collectibles, they're especially susceptible to their value easily fluctuating. I remember when my dad was into collecting baseball cards. He told me one time about one Braves player whose card jumped in value all of a sudden because he had been named Rookie of the Year. But my dad pointed out that if that player didn't do well the next season, the value of his card would probably plummet. And I think it probably did. The perceived value of things can go up and down. And I'm afraid we're living in a time when the value of life has gone down, largely due to the moral and spiritual condition of our society. Life seems to be given little value today. And we see clear evidence of that in the world around us, don't we? There's the rising rate of violent crime and murder. We just think about the mass killings over the past week at that club in Colorado and at that Walmart in Virginia. It's not only the fact that more of those crimes are being committed, and on top of that, with our technology, we hear more about them and we're more aware of what's going on in some of these other places, but it's the fact that it's so often done with little or no provocation and done with little regard for life and for the seriousness of taking a person's life. People getting, shot and killed because somebody blew his horn at another driver, or because someone burned the toast, or because of an argument over a video game, or some other very trivial act. There are some who claim to have taken other people's lives simply out of curiosity, or for fun, or for adventure. Very little value is put on a person's life. Of course, abortion has been in the news a lot this past year. The support of that practice is another sign of the lack of value put on human life. Sometimes the debate is over when life begins, but for a lot of people, it actually comes down to whether or not a person has the right to take that baby's life. That showed up in a survey that was done years ago among teenagers. At that time, the vast majority of those teens actually equated abortion with murder. They considered it to be the taking of a human life. But the disturbing part is that the same overwhelming majority of teenagers felt that they should have the right and the option to be able to take that life if they chose to do so. So you see, when you put their answers to those two questions together, they were essentially saying that they wanted to be able to commit murder if they chose to do so. They were admitting that the unborn baby is a human life, but they were saying that it's not very valuable, that we should be able to destroy that life if we want to. With that view of life, putting that little value on life, it's no wonder that so many teens are committing suicide and not thinking it's such a bad thing even to take their own life. Now we can speculate as to why life is given so little value today. We can point to factors like TV and movies where violence is so commonly seen, people getting killed so often that it does become almost commonplace. Or we can point to video games where you can kill somebody or get killed and there aren't any permanent consequences. Just start a new game or another level and you're alive again. So life and death doesn't mean that much. But when we consider the reasons for it, I believe the bottom line is the spiritual condition of mankind. People are so self-centered that they have little regard for other people and for life itself. Well, if it helps me or solves my dilemma to take that unborn child's life, then I'll do it. Well, if that person gets in my way, I'll shoot him and teach him not to mess with me. In spite of what some try to claim, the main problem isn't guns. One of the main problems is selfishness and self-centeredness. It often involves looking for the easy way out, and some people consider that to be taking their own life. But it's primarily because of man's spiritual condition that there is little value put on life. As we turn away from God, little regard is given to what He says about the value of our lives, as well as the lives of others. Because God places a high value on human life. God places a high value on human life. In the Genesis account, man was the crown of God's creation. In that verse we read at the beginning, God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." And He breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living being or a living soul. There was something special about man that set him apart from all the rest of creation. He wasn't just another animal. Rather, unlike anything else, man was made in the image and likeness of God. Now, most believe that concept of image includes things like the ability to reason and to choose, as well as the capacity to be holy and to have a relationship with God. Therefore, every human being is special and valuable in God's sight. So the taking of such a life, through either suicide or murder, is a very serious matter in the eyes of the Lord. A little later in Genesis, we see that. In chapter 4, when Cain killed Abel, and Cain had to face God's severe judgment because of it. And then later, in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, God told Noah, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed." And then it tells why. It goes on and says, "For in the image of God He made man." Shedding man's blood, taking the life of one who had been formed in the image of God, was a serious matter, and it still is a serious matter today. And God placed serious consequences on anyone who dared to do it. So right from the beginning, in Genesis, the book of beginnings, we see that God made man special and considered human life to be very valuable. And then as you go throughout the rest of God's Word, that fact comes out again and again. It's especially shown in the Lord's love and care for mankind. Remember, Jesus told us that God cares for the birds and watches over the sparrows, but then you remember what He added? He said, "You are of more value than many sparrows." God cares about us. He loves us. Your life is of great value to Him. And the greatest evidence of that is the fact that God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. God loved man so much that He did what we celebrate and rejoice in, especially here during the Christmas season. He sent His Son into this world for our salvation. God loves you and me that much. He cares about you so much that He gave His own Son for you. He considers you and your life that valuable. So although the value of human life may be diminishing in the eyes of the world, in God's sight and in reality, human life has always been special, precious, and valuable. It's not anything to be taken lightly, because we're created in God's likeness, and we have that capacity to have a personal relationship with Him and to be holy. So I believe what the Lord wants to emphasize to each of us today is the fact that your life is valuable. Human life in general is valuable. We've seen that, and we need to recognize that. We also need to know that our own life, your life specifically, is valuable. Apparently, it can be a real temptation for a number of people today to throw away or destroy that precious life that God's given them. Older people sometimes face that temptation as they face a deteriorating physical condition or some kind of serious illness. It can be a temptation sometimes to consider taking one's life, or as they face the prospect of years of loneliness in that season of life. Or maybe it's just getting to a place in life where they feel useless or helpless, or like they're just a burden on others, on family, and on society. Or maybe it comes as they feel like they haven't accomplished all that they wanted to in life and realize that they probably won't be able to at this point. So in light of all that, we're told that more elderly people are considering or committing suicide. And I believe the Lord would say to the older folks among us, don't ever forget the value of life and of your life. Don't try to take the reins or the control over life and death out of the hands of God. Trust Him to give you the grace and strength that you need to endure whatever these later years of life may bring. But it's not just older people. More young people are giving in to that temptation today. As they face the pressures and the problems of life and the confusion that is rampant today as our world turns away from God and His Word and common sense, especially in these areas of personal identity that young people have always struggled with, they can come to see suicide as one way of escape, an easy way to get out of life and get away from its problems. There was a time when I didn't think this especially needed to be emphasized to young people in church. But I've mentioned to you before about one time when I was teaching a class at church camp. This was many years ago. And we were talking about temptation. And when I asked them what some of the common temptations were that they faced, it kind of surprised me at the time that many of them included suicide as being near the top of their list. And that was years ago. I don't think it's gotten any better. So young people, don't ever seriously consider throwing away the precious gift of life God's given you. It's too valuable. But it's not just the elderly and the young. At certain times, people of any age may feel like giving up. They might look for some way to escape unpleasant circumstances and to get away from it all. They may wonder, what's the use of continuing on, and may feel that temptation to take their own life. So I believe the Lord wants to remind us all of us, young and old and in between, that your life is valuable. Your life is precious to the Lord who created you and who gave His own Son to redeem you. Your life is important to others, and it should be precious to you too. I realize this has been a little different kind of a message this morning, but unfortunately, in the times we live in, it's something people, even church people, need to be reminded of more and more. Human life, your life, is a wonderful life and a valuable life. The opportunity to live and breathe each day is a great gift from God. Don't ever give in to the temptation to throw that precious life away in any form or fashion, but rather let's make the most of this opportunity of life that we've been given by living in such a way that pleases the Lord. The most wonderful life of all is that life that's lived for God and for His glory.